What's really important is to recognize that one of the best interviewers in the world is a Black woman. And that's sometimes lost. We're so tied up with regards to, or so preoccupied with the Harry and Meghan, that we almost forget that the most important interviewer in the world is a Black woman.
I wanted to get started talking about the book you co-authored with Sir Lenny Henry. It is honest, it's well written, it's raw. There's this strong emphasis that this book is for everyone. For those who haven't read the book, can you explain why this emphasis is important and what you want readers to get out of this book?
I think that all too often debates around diversity is seeing it as a minority issue, and how the majority are somehow giving crumbs off the table or just helping the minority. When in reality, the people that we think of as being underrepresented groups are the vast, vast majority. Once you think about it in terms of race, sexuality, disability, gender, and making sure you're looking at people outside of London, because Britain is very London-centric, you actually get to a number of 96.9% of the population are from an ethnic minority, and or women, and or disabled, and or LGBTQ+, and or outside of London. That's 96.9%. So the people we think of being the majority, white, heterosexual, able-bodied, straight men living in London, make up, you can do the maths, but make up 3.1%. So we wanted to change the fundamental way that we see this.
I love how the book talks about race, it talks about class, it talks about gender, how they intersect, and how each of those elements factor into diverse representation, as you say. So often it seems that some organizations and companies believe that the quest for diversity stops at race, and that it stops at the appointment of one person heading a diversity and inclusion department. How do you think your book will encourage employers and people in positions of authority to think differently?
I hope that people will think about intersectionality a lot more. Currently, if you look at most organizations, the way they record diversity, they very rarely, I don't even think ever, really break down how many disabled Black people they have, or how many women of color. And you need to look at intersectionality. I think that's really important, because I'm Black, you're Black, but our experience is going to be quite different. You as a Black woman, me as a Black man, and there'll be different hurdles. We absolutely share commonalities, but there's going to be different hurdles as well. And if we're really going to address those hurdles to make sure that there's better representation, right, we need to recognize the differences, right? And also the commonalities. This isn't about one post. This isn't about one person or two people becoming the CEO, or, they're not even close to normally being the CEO, heading a diversity department, right? You're talking about a culture change, and a culture change requires far more than one person, even at the highest level.
And something that was really profound and relatable to me in the book was actually in chapter 3, where Sir Lenny Henry recounts meeting a young Black researcher working at the BBC in the 90s, and how his cultural capital changed to align more with the people he worked with. And it actually made me think of my first day studying a master's in journalism, being told to listen to certain radio shows and consume certain news outlets. And just that conflict, having already developed my own tastes and interests within journalism. What do you think is the solution to this issue? How can journalism institutions ensure that students from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds maintain the very essence of who they are?
There has to be a recognition that what we're trying to achieve is what they call inclusion, and making sure that our values and our culture is valued and prioritized in certain places, as opposed to just trying to get people that are basically the same as the people currently in power, but just with more melanin, or people who are basically the same as the people in positions of power, but happen to be in a wheelchair, or happen to, have a different sexual orientation. The hardest part about diversity and inclusion is that what you're trying to do is make sure there's a shift in power, power share amongst people who actually have different values, have different cultures, will perceive the world different from you. We have to keep that in the forefront of our mind. We're trying to achieve a proper cultural shift, and make sure that diversity is real diversity.
I want to dive into the report that you wrote last year for BECTU, proposing an independent reporting body to tackle racism in the broadcasting industry. What are some of the ways a body like this can build trust, making people safe enough to report incidents of racism?
Currently, if you look at Black and people of colour's representation in unions, they're underrepresented in unions. There doesn't seem to be a history of people of colour in trade unions, and where you do get relatively good representation. So, for example, the Writers Guild has relatively good representation for people of colour. You don't get active participation, because in a perfect world, what would happen in theory is that people suffering from racism in whichever walk of life, whichever industry they're in, there are trade unions. That relationship is clearly not working. So we need to find a way in which we build up that trust. And an independent body is a way that BECTU thinks could work. That trust is often with regards to a trade union. Your trade union rep may be a white man or woman who, if you're suffering from racism, you will think might not understand those issues, even though unions do give people training on those issues, but you might not think that they understand those issues. And so it'd be good that people know that they can approach a body specifically with that task in mind. And at the very least, right now, nobody's even collecting the statistics. So if Channel 4 has X number of racist incidents reported to them, and BBC has X number, they're disparate figures. We don't know if the overall number is going up, whether it's going down. So even if it's just as simple as having a body that collects the figures right now.
And then obviously it's been a challenging and eye-opening month. A lot of truths have been unearthed and brought to the forefront, but it is really positive and also such an achievement to see the launch of the PressPad Charitable Foundation, with Harry and Meghan being among the first donors. Can you talk about your role as a trustee and what are your hopes for this foundation?
Yeah, sure. So what I definitely don't want to do is oversell my role, because I am not at the coal front, so to speak, of the charity. So PressPad has been going a couple of years. It was launched and has been going very successfully without me, I hasten to add. And it was initially launched looking at the problem that people have getting work experience, and the issue of so many of those work experience opportunities being in London. It was initially launched as looking at a way of addressing that, in that it was almost like easiest way to describe it would be a charitable Airbnb. So producers or people with accommodation in London would be able to put up somebody outside of London who wanted that work experience, be able to take advantage of that. They realized that they couldn't just stop there, that they needed to look at other forms of diversity, not just regional diversity. And so they are expanding that, and they feature and highlight people of color and women and other forms of diversity. And with this charitable initiative, they're looking at ways in which they can support not just PressPad, but the whole sector. My job as a trustee is literally just to make sure that there's good governance, and when they're going in a certain direction, to say, yes, that's a good direction to go in. No, I'm not sure if that's a good direction to go in. So to offer my advice and to offer my managerial experience on that.
Coming back to like Meghan and Harry's interview, There's obviously been loads of opinions online about it. I actually asked some of my friends about it. I spoke to some journalists about the interview too. Just finding out what people liked and what people didn't like about the interview. I was wondering, if you had the opportunity to interview Meghan and Harry, how would you approach it and what would you ask?
You can't do better than Oprah. Like, literally, you can't. I am, if I could interview as well, let alone better than Oprah, that would be amazing. I think what's really important is to recognize that one of the best interviewers in the world is a Black woman. And that's sometimes lost. We're so tied up with regards to, or so preoccupied with the Harry and Meghan, that we almost forget that the most important interviewer in the world is a Black woman, right? And so when in the UK they say they can't find the talent, or whenever you hear anybody say that diversity is a risk, or where would we be able to get somebody who's competent enough to do X, or we weren't able to find the talent to do Y, when we're given the opportunities when we're given the ability to take the opportunities, as Oprah has, we are world beaters. I just think Oprah is amazing. And, that's one Black woman. And there are many, many more Black women and women of color who I think could possibly be as good as Oprah, but they haven't got the opportunities.
Last week, I saw a clip where a journalist asked Prince William whether the royal family is racist. He responded saying, "The royal family is," and I quote, "very much not a racist family." It frustrated me because I think as journalists, we need to consider the types of questions we ask people in positions of authority. When the topic is racism, what do you think are some of the right questions to ask?
I think that sometimes if you ask, is something racist, you very quickly can get into a binary, yes, it's racist, no, it isn't racist, which isn't that helpful, Whereas I think it's more useful to think are people of color suffering from racism in an organization? Or do you think that people of color, sometimes you need to annoyingly take out the R word and say, do you think people of color are disadvantaged unfairly by that organization? And then that's not a simple binary. Otherwise, you get into a silly thing of, the only people who seem to be racist seem to be the Ku Klux Klan or some football hooligan, when we all know that as Black people, we experience disadvantage, we experience racism by some really nice people. There can be really nice people who can have racist actions which disadvantage us. But the problem is, once we actually talk about racists, they clam up and you don't get a constructive debate. But do we suffer from racism? Yes. And for that specific element with regards to is the royal family racist, I think we need to divorce the family from the palace, because if anybody asked me if my family is X or my family is Y in a derogatory way, I would answer that my family is great. It's only normal to be defensive. But it's not about the royal family. It's about an institution, and a really important institution, which is on par with the Bank of England or on par with a government department. And what we see is a Black woman alleging that due to her race, or her race played an important part of her not being able to function within that organization. And as such, that's really important, whether that is the palace or whether that is the Bank of England or whatever. So I think the question could be reframed with regards to, is the institution disadvantaging Black people? Do you think that Black people can survive in the institution of the royal family?
As a final question, obviously, like you've seen the article that Nadine wrote, and she made a very valid point in this piece she wrote for The Independent on the denial of racism being a deterrent for young people seeking a career in journalism. Seeing the injustices that occur in the journalism industry and society as a whole, what has stopped you from leaving the industry altogether? And what advice can you give to aspiring journalists seeing this interview?
First of all, it's one of the best jobs in the world. It's absolutely brilliant. You can Nadine is having influence and impacting on government policies. She is creating public good to an extent that very few other professions can do. So, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. So, I would definitely advise people to go into it. I love journalism, and if you like writing and if you want to change the world, there's no better profession, right? Having said that, the media industry is a very tough profession because there are glass ceilings. There is systemic racism. There is no doubt, right? And so, as such, I would advise anybody that wants to go into it to make sure that they have support structures and they have strategies to be able to deal with what is potentially incredibly hard. And there are other Black journalists, there are other Black people in media, and that you can reach out to, that you can connect with. They might not be in your organization, but we can find them. There's organizations like We Are Black Journos, there's RaceBeat. If you're in the BBC, there's BBC Embrace, which is the People of Color Network. There's a similar one in ITN. If you try and do this alone, it will actually have mental health issues. But if we support each other, just like Lenny supports me and I try and support Lenny, and as I said in the book as well, I run. You've got to find something else to help your mental health. Lenny does yoga. So we all need to do something, And the other way you can do it is go out and buy the book and think, yes, there are other people who feel the way that I feel. So, if you're struggling, just buy the book and then buy another copy as well.